This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. And if you're looking for podcast production support, we highly recommend them. Find them at trisonic.co.uk.
I always say strategists and your own CFOs in marketing are your best salespeople, but we have not taken advantage of that.
Can they really deliver that if I give them that money? Nah, fuck them.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. Is there a more important relationship in our industry than that between the CMO and the CFO? Given the macro environment, war, inflation, constant uncertainty, AI threatening to upend entire industries, I wanted to have a discussion about the interests of financial leaders as they relate to marketing, and why outcomes-driven measurement has emerged as one of the ways forward in the boardroom. Nimmi Shah is a consultant finance director for the media, marketing, and PR industries, and has worked with many of the major agency groups. Modha is the outcome measurement innovation lead at ITV, and one of the individuals spearheading the broadcaster's in-development outcome measurement solution, Lantern. We discussed how financial pressures are having downstream effects on media investment, how CMOs should better communicate to CFOs, why advertising needs to prove business outcomes in the short and long term, and how AI is causing a host of new opportunities, but also conundrums for marketers. This is our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Nimmi Shah and Modha, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hello.
I think it's a bit of an understatement to say that we're in a really interesting macro environment at the moment. There's inflation, potentially stagflation, God forbid, which could bite as a result of the US-Israel war with Iran. Big tech companies are spending like crazy on AI, which is disrupting labor markets. Nimmi, I wanted to start with you. How are CFOs generally considering this macro environment, and what big challenges are they trying to solve as part of that or otherwise?
So I think what I'd say is that it's weird because there's lots of things. What you'd think would be the priority isn't. So things like cybersecurity have come up, customers have come up. So, geopolitics, all of that, it's just so many things that what you thought is a pressure isn't even as big a pressure as other things. It's, I've got relative percentages and what FX, P&L, all of that. You would think that's a priority, but it's just so many different things that getting their mental capacity at the moment is really, really difficult.
Is it just they're focusing on what they can control type of issue?
It is. I mean, there is so many things that they can control and so many things that they can't control at the moment. They're jumping between board meetings. Then there's the tech talent. I don't even know, when I'm talking to them, I literally cannot say where we're all starting. If it's FX management, cash flow, especially at the moment, is really, really volatile. So, I've been working with quite a few founders who are fundraising and, where they thought they were with cash flow, and it's becoming tighter because, you can see where people are starting to put their cash flow, what little cash flow there is, it's going into certain type of tech companies. So what's left for the rest of us when everything else is becoming tighter is actually harder. Gotcha.
Samir, you're at ITV now, but you've also spent parts of your career at Mindshare, at Google. Looking back and now looking forward, how do you see financial pressures having changed? Is it any different now, or is it sort of more of the same?
It's always a tricky one, this, because in fact, I think Jeremy Bullmore years and years ago did a piece where he started with this quote that was about, the intense pressure in modern business today and how things are changing rapidly and so on. And then, of course, the rug pull was from, 1903 or whatever. And you go, oh, I see what you've done there. Okay, fair enough. And so I always check myself when I'm reaching for a phrase like, oh, yes, things are different now, or things are changing really fast, or so on. But I think Nimmi's got it, which is that the averages may be the same, but that volatility and the spikiness of the things that we're encountering is reshaping some of those conversations within companies, because they've got to go, okay, it's suddenly this or it's suddenly that, and then it's suddenly not this or that. And that's really challenging because it's hard to zoom out and to think in any sort of strategic way, I suppose, about the future, because you're lurching from one drama to the next. And obviously, I mean, I'm going to stay away from politics, but there are other reasons why some of that volatility is human induced. Let's just leave it at
that. We can have a therapy session later, but we don't need to get into too much politics at the moment. But when it comes to marketing and how it enters the picture, I mean, how much of the CFO's ear does the CMO even generally have, Nimmi?
So this time last year, I was jumping up and down because 6 months before that, a senior accountant at one of the big firms said to me, the door that you're talking about is not even going to be opened. And that was when they were considering brand to be on the balance sheet. Now, I'm not going to go about performance v brand because forget it. But for me, brand is marketing as an investment, whatever type of marketing it is, but it's going to generate future revenue. Psychologically, if a CFO thought of it as an investment, it will get more time. We as an industry, and I've been talking about this for so long, didn't do what we should have done, which is communicate it and talk about marketing as an investment. If we can't even sell ourselves and produce the data to accountants, the CFO isn't going to take people as seriously. The CFO is very, very big on accountability, but they don't have the capacity to sit there and understand they've got a whole balance sheet to understand. They've got a whole P&L to understand. There's loads and loads of line items. You're talking to different budget holders. You've got to make their life easy to get some of that attention, but you've also got to be able to translate it effectively. And ultimately it will be ROI, KPI, which I know our industry hates, but I think there is a way to do it as well. But it's also about the long-term metrics. And when I talk about that is I've sat in rooms with CFOs, who are peers, but in other industries. We've talked about advertising. We haven't even touched on ROI and KPI. And what I think people forget when they're sort of almost antagonistic towards CFOs is to say, actually, they're also consumers. They probably are the biggest strategists behind strategists you'll ever meet. I think you've seen some of my emails where I've sort of been predicting stuff. And I was like, actually, a lot of people have heard me talking about the balance sheet and how I read the balance sheet. I spend a lot of time predicting stuff from balance sheets, and you can almost strategically see certain plays happening. And I think if you can explain that, I always say strategists and your own CFOs in marketing are your best salespeople, but we have not taken advantage of that.
It's interesting. I feel like this conversation's been going on for a long time of needing to speak the CFO's language, the CMO needing to speak the CFO's language.
God forbid a CMO starts talking about sort of leasehold and IFRS 15 or something. and certainly a bit dark. But I think what you've got to do is it's about the future revenue streams. The analogy I used is you've got to have something that keeps the lights on now, but you've got to have something that's going to be safe for a rainy day, and you've got to do something that meets both. And you've got to explain to them how you're doing it, remembering they're a consumer as well, and then sort of aligning it to sort of say, actually, we know that we've got the consumer research, which we'll do. Because, marketing, we always talk about what an outcome is, but we've got research, we've got data, we've got panels, we've got so many brilliant things. Yet we don't collaborate. We don't then sit there and explain it to them. And, this is also where I've sort of said, the industry bodies get together, actually go to some of the things where you are going to capture their attention, talk about it and say, look, ultimately it is about ROI and KPI, but in a thing where everything's personalized and it's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio, well, what is the point of our industry at that point?
You said the key word there, which is outcome. Do CFOs demand business outcomes? And if so, I mean, the $1 million question, how's that affecting media investment that the CMO is making? And Samir, I know you're working on outcome measurement at the moment, so yeah. I know you have a view on
it. I do, although I'd almost frame it with a conversation about trust and credibility. So if I reflect on the conversations that I see even within ITV, you know, we're also an organization that has a marketing budget and all the rest of it. You know, as Nimmi says, you've got to imagine someone who's looking at the entire business through the lens of a set of numbers. And every year there's more demands on that than they can possibly afford. So they have to kind of take a red pen out or, you know, the red button in Excel and apply it to a bunch of things. And that's where, you know, we tend to think of that as purely rational decisions, and they're not. I mean, you know, budget allocation in marketing is multiply not rational, but one of the most important ways in which it isn't is at that interface. Because if you're going down that list, you know, at sort of 8:00 in the evening with a glass of wine or whatever, as you try, you know, prepare for your presentation the following day, where you tell people what they're not going to get, there's an element of trust that comes in, and you've got to look at each one and go, yeah, do I really think they can do that? Can they really deliver that if I give them that money? Nah, fuck them. 0. And then the next one, and then the next one, and so on. And that's the bit that we often miss, is that, you know, that they're consumers and they're humans too, and building that relationship and building that credibility, which is about sustained delivery over time. It's about meeting, you know, honoring your promises. And I tiny example of this, you know, the budget that I look after has grown a little bit over time, and it's grown through interactions with the finance people who look after ITV Commercial. And every year we have, you know, a conversation where I am sitting up in the meeting, and I feel like I need to give a good account of myself, and I need to show that I've been responsible with the money, that I'm thinking about where it's going and what's going to happen after that. And that's this pathetic little microcosm, but it's the same thing, just times a zillion. You know, I used to be sent, in one of my old jobs, you can guess which, I used to be sent to go and find the finance minion who held the Excel spreadsheet in which the marketing budget sat.
Okay.
And I had a whole load of armory from, you know, consultancies that we'd commissioned and things like that. And I would sit down with this poor chap and go, look, this is the best practice for setting up this thing. And look, I'll even give you a template on how to do it. And, you know, this bit of money for my medium should be treated very differently to this other bit of money, because this is how it works. And, you know, I've meet advertisers all the time who will say, well, yeah, obviously my budget that's set for Google and Meta money is set as a percentage of sales. And if we're making more money, I give them more money. Duh. The sort of the other bits of marketing budget, the telly, the brand, the what have you, that obviously sits separately because that's a bit more debatable.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, that gets on to my next question, which is every bellwether, every AA work comes out, and you see more money sort of moving, generally speaking, out of quote unquote traditional media sources, media channels, publishing, TV sometimes, and toward platforms like the Metas and Googles. And is that, you think, part of the reason why, which is it's actually viewed almost differently from the finance people,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they can quote unquote prove outcomes?
It's fair. It's just it's such a clear thing to read. You spent some money. What did you get for that money? Oh, here's a receipt. The receipt tells me I got, you know, half a hundredweight of clicks, or of sales leads, or of something that I actually care about as a finance person. Oh, okay, that seems like it's sensible. It's from one of these big technology thingies. They probably know what they're doing. That's fine. You know, that's entirely straightforward. And the world that we all have historically inhabited is a very different one, where, you know, we were in a world where, you know, you were talking about a world where there was no data, or very tiny amounts of data that were published in large paper books that I had to go and look at. TGI used to be a collection of books that you'd have to pull off the shelf, believe it or not.
Sounds dreamy.
Yeah, it was. No, it really wasn't. But you know, if you wind back to that kind of time, sure, we used reach as a proxy metric because, frankly, it was the only thing you could measure. And yet we've ossified around that as an industry, and now we think that the reach and the reach metrics are the end in themselves, where they were only ever a means to an end. And then along came another set of companies who said, well, we'll give you a receipt for the thing that you bought. And so, you know, when we look at things like the IPA did this thing on the signal and the noise version 2, which I sort of feel bad criticising, because I think it was partly commissioned by the dear departed Denise, and so it's a weird one, but the way that narrative has been spun as, oh, this is terrible, and all this money is being traded on proprietary metrics, and that's a sad thing for the industry, and we need to go back to the world where it's mostly on kind of open, transparent currencies. You go, well, no, you're missing the point, because most of it isn't spent buying an eyeball at all. Most of it is spent buying the receipt that says I got something that I can take to the CFO, which will continue to justify my budget. And that's a very different dynamic. And so, Neil Bournemouth, I think last year at one of the conferences, said we need to
publicist.
measure better, not lecture harder. And I think that's entirely right. It's not. If it were the case that the medium that we look after is this kind of totally delayed sleeper thing that only benefits you after year one, then that would be one thing. I could sort of get that. But it's not that. It's certainly, it doesn't pay for itself in the first days or maybe even weeks sometimes, but it does in that kind of middle bit of time. The weeks to the quarters to maybe the whole year if you're lucky. That is the, back to the glass of wine and the 8 o'clock in the evening spreadsheet. That's the place where you need the stuff to show up. Not a year later at an MMM debrief, by which time the budget's already locked in and it's a sort of pointless exercise.
I mean, Nimmi, is that just an issue of short-termism?
Yes and no. So I am going to slightly disagree with Samir here, because
brilliant.
we do multi-year planning. And one of the things that, last year I did see was Interbrand starting to do some analysis. And they were sort of talking about, the long term and, invest. So I am going to try and avoid talking about investment in brand, but I am talking about brand in that sense where, we have spent some money on something that has captured somebody's attention.
Demand generation
in
Sure.
some way, shape or form. And over time, it proves it. Now, obviously, as well as an accountant, I am very much an economist as well. So you do hit a point of diminishing returns. So I think you've always got to look at the product life cycle, all sorts of things. But this is where I always go back to my, I've been talking about the Yorkshire tea example a lot. And it was like, it was the fourth, it wasn't doing very well. It was a declining market. Yet they invested in marketing and we're almost like, we need the industry to come with us. And I always say marketing needs to do the same thing, where it's like they became the number one, but they weren't going to sit there sort of having a go at PG Tips or whatever. They were like, actually, PG Tips, we need you to start doing better as well. But we've got a great marketing campaign. We're going to be number one. And they've done it using a lot of different types of things. But I think Samir is also very, very right on the trust, because I think there's a lot of things that have been missed. The CFO has got to have trust in what you're doing. And data at the moment, we've worked with rubbish in, rubbish out for so long. The CFO has worked with it for so long. And the problem now is we've got so much misinformation and disinformation coming in. It is making the CFO's job much, much harder. And
about their own data?
Or data that they've got. So I will say, so Meta, I don't think we've explained the business model of Meta that well for a start, let's say, with the sort of clicks and all of that sort of stuff. I think they sort of get it, but like I said, they don't have a big capacity. Now, with AI, it was Meta before with social media. It's now becoming about the news as well, where we're having AI clickbait starting to happen as well. And if you, especially with the sort of war going on at the moment, if you've got to decide on energy hedging, if you've got to decide when your products are coming in from, the Far East, what route they're going to take, what the delays are going to be, if you've got disinformation coming in and you don't have validated information, that is going to be so much more costly. So I think what we've missed as an industry is talking about the full funnel as well. And actually, CFOs are very, very quite big on sort of ESG type things. So actually sort of saying...
Are they really? Still?
I mean, I know there have been reversals, but the ones I talk to are still, because actually, if you think about it, sustainability
It's a long-term risk.
it's a long-term risk, but also there's actually, so I basically, there's one of those farmhouse tables that cost a small fortune. Now somebody was getting rid of one, like not that far from me. I basically, was like, well, this is what I want, but rather than spending like $1,000 on it, I'll take yours for free. I'll do a bit of sanding, do a bit of repainting. And actually, I've got something that looks not that dissimilar to a £1,000 table. But what I'm saying is that's the sort of sustainability, because it's actually a cost saving at the same time. So with the disinformation, actually, what you're losing is bad decision making, which is also going to be costly in the long run. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but
I think it works. Do CFOs then need a receipt that they can trust in order to make spending decisions? Because it sounds, you're sort of suggesting there's lots of data out there. CFOs may or may not be getting the right signals from both the market or from internally, and yet they might be trusting one thing without thinking about it in as much depth, or they might not have trust in another receipt that they might be getting from a different, say, media owner.
So I think there'll be sort of nuances depending on the industry. But let's say with my media and marketing hat on, I will be looking at the team saying, there are account leads. Who do I trust is going to give me the revenue they say they're going to be? Who do I think has given me some sort of revenue that is never going to materialize? What is the average I'm going to get? And then what are the spends I'm going to have versus that? Now, a retail CFO, I've spoken to a few. I've not really worked in retail, but I've spoken to quite a few. They at the moment are like, well, what's consumer demand doing at the moment? What actual, liquid spend do people have? What products have I, to my point about what products am I getting into the store? What liquid spend do the consumers have? How do I marry the two up? And, they're making those type of decisions at the moment as well. But they need to sort of have some faith in the macroeconomics that are coming out, the data they're getting from their stores, versus also consumer demands, and sort of say, if it's a fashion retailer, well, has that buyer done a good job in the latest fashion things? Do I trust that is going to, it's going to fly off the shelf, versus actually that's going to be sitting there at the end of the line and we're going to have a whole load of stock that we've got a sample sale of? That's the sort of decision making they're making. So, their costs are getting up because, as we know, the geopolitics are causing the cost to come up, but the revenue is declining, partly because of consumer spend, but partly for other reasons as well, and they've just got to match the two up. Right,
could just be the wrong type of product solution for the market. Could just be that purses are tightening and people don't want to be spending as much, and so different goods perform differently.
And this is where I have, for the last couple of years, been talking about business outcomes, the business model, but partnerships. I think marketing has lost the ability to do partnerships very well. I think so. I used to be in travel marketing during the pandemic.
Fun times.
I mean, this is why I have grey hair. It was like, and I was talking to, I loosely chatted with a well-known CMO, and he was, on the airport floor at that time doing comms messaging because it was chaos as well. And, but then after that, we've now got sort of £13 billion hotels coming up. And it's like, if you've got £13 billion hotels, you still need to fill those. So how do you compare £1 billion hotel versus another £1 billion hotel that's being built in London? This is where marketing should be able to produce great results and do good things and actually talk about itself and sell itself. It's not going to be an easy ROI, but I think to what Samir is talking about, there is data there. We just need to pull it and then remember the CFO as a consumer and marry those two things together.
Samir, you're working on creating a sort of new receipt, let's say, for TV, to continue using that word. Talk me through a little bit what Lantern is, for anyone, first of all, who hasn't listened to our prior podcast. Go and listen to it with Matt Hill as well from Sky. Where you are in the process, just as a quick update, but then also how you think CMOs should be considering what Lantern and other forms of new outcome measurement are, and how to communicate that to the CFO.
Okay, yeah, I could do it that way around. So practically, Lantern last year, 2025, was a proof of concept, and people forget that the proof bit is important. And it was an open question. The question that we asked at the time was, could a reasonably large scale, but still thousands, behavioral panel that measures lots of online and offline outcomes, because even the offline outcomes show up in your inbox and stuff like that, could that actually be viable as a way of measuring the multiplicity of effects that TV generates? And that was a genuinely open question. And luckily the answer was yes, it can. So that was a satisfying thing to be able to come back and say, whenever it was, last autumn. And then we said, okay, yes, it works, but there's a slight caveat, which is if we were to just do it on a panel on its own, which is how we do it in the the audience measurement world, typically, just have a big panel and do it all through that wouldn't be viable. And, scaling the panel to 20, 30,000 people from cold is it's not, it's all relative, right? But it's a decent chunk of money. And then we started looking around to think, okay, well, how else could we do this? And where we got to was a pattern that exists actually elsewhere. Economists love panel data and they often combine it with other things, is to do a hybrid where you have a tag that gives you the sort of very short-term impact, and it gives you it at scale. And as we've been saying, that by itself is never enough to justify the TV budget, particularly not stuff outside of daytime. And then you sort of mathematically splice that with the panel data. And so we're boosting the panel to make it bigger this year. We're adding this tag data alongside it. And to make all of that work, what all the broadcasters agreed to do, which I still have to pinch myself when I think about this, because it is, and it was Wayne at Sky, it was one of the sort of guiding lights behind this. I remember when he dropped it into the meeting, I was like, yeah, that's an amazing idea, but I'd never thought that would fly. Was essentially we all agreed to put all of our ad exposure data into a single bucket, or data lake, whatever you want to call it, but a single place where you've got all of the linear and VOD exposures that happen across Sky, across Channel 4, across ITV. Having that suddenly becomes an amazing resource in its own right. So we're trying to, it's like those films where, you're, I don't know, riding a horse, and then you've got to transit from the horse to the railway. And so you've got to ride as fast as you can. And then there's that delicate moment where, we're essentially riding two horses, because we're riding the whole thing about, broadcast infrastructure and all the costs of that. We're trying to make this transition to a world where it's all IP delivered and everything. So sorry, I'm distracting myself. But so the idea of this is that we'll have a larger panel, we'll have the tag, and then we'll have this third bit, which is this pool of exposure data, which then becomes a wider resource for the industry. And we're on the cusp of then inviting advertisers in to work with us on that. And it's a genuinely open question. It's like, come and see what we're playing with, see how it works. See what you find useful. So there's some bits that we can do, that you can do better than we can do, but there'll be other bits like, share of, that we can do really nicely that you can't, because, an advertiser doesn't have the website data for all of its competition.
Right.
But we do. So we can take that and we can look at it. We can look at all of those share dynamics. And, we've known since, Field and Binet were in short pants that share of something matters quite a bit, and so we'll be able to surface all of those. So that's the immediate thing for this year, is kind of get it to the beta stage with a hybrid model, and build those additional bits of plumbing, if you like.
Assuming it all works and everything goes well, how does a CMO communicate this to a CFO and say, you know what, we now have this great new data coming from the TV industry. We don't necessarily need to be as reliant on outcomes from some of the other platforms that are being delivered that I've told you about, that I've shown you. Here's these great numbers. Do you think CMOs are easily equipped, or sort of what would your advice be to them?
This is my winter is coming speech. Sorry, but it really is. Because we're going to collide. We're going to need to collide in the middle. I can't remember what the wall was where they fought in the end.
It was
But,
called The Wall.
It
I
was
think.
called. Oh,
I
there we
think
go.
it was,
Right,
yeah.
right. That was easy. So I really should pay more attention to TV programs.
Oh god.
It's been off air for a number of years now.
there we
You're
go.
excused.
So the reason that is coming is that we're coming from the long time horizon end of things. The enlightened CFO who does a 3-5 year plan and thinks it through and so on. That, of course, that still happens. You said it.
No, they do exist, and then you throw it out the window 2 minutes later.
Yes. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. Whatever. Yes. So we've been in that world, and barring the kind of hand wringing and pearl clutching about audience measurement panels and currencies and all of those sorts of things, we have to get TV to show up in the nearer term, because if it doesn't show up in the nearer term, it might as well not exist. But the thing that is coming the other way, what were they called? The White Walkers?
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Look, it's all coming back to you now.
You've got it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were scary, weren't they? But no, the thing that is coming, and I'll have a slightly weird way into this. I was listening to an incredibly geeky podcast, even by my standards, with a chap who is designing the next generation of processor to run AI models. And he used to work on this famous chip at Google called the TPU, which is the tensor processing unit that they've been building for years. And it's an amazing bit of kit that runs machine learning models. And he said something, and I fell off my chair, because he said, yeah, when I was on the TPU team, there were things that we wanted to do with the chip design for pure LLM purposes or whatever that we couldn't do because we always had to think about the ads workloads. So what he was saying was, right in the heart of designing the most important hardware that Google has, his team was required to think about models that they were building for advertising, so that he didn't have a free rein as a chip designer. And what that illustrates is how deep this goes in terms of the importance of predictive models to the platforms. The reason that they're able to work the way that they do is, an impression comes along, and in that instant, they are able to predict, okay, if I serve this ad in that impression slot, is it more likely to generate one of these outcomes for one of these advertisers? If so, I'll put that one in. And that is one of the glories of modern data science. But that is about as good as, if you've seen the Ethan Mollick thing, he does this thing about, do a picture of an otter on a plane using Wi-Fi. And, a couple of years ago, you got these mutant otters draped over a plane wing. I mean, it was the stuff of nightmares. And now, of course, AI can do it without even thinking about it. The contrast between how good those models were then and how good they are now is the same scale of improvement that is about to happen in the platform models. So the platform models are brilliant at saying, okay, I'm going to put this ad in front of Nimmi right now because she's just searched for this thing, and so it's obviously going to buy it. Duh. I mean, that is sort of obvious, and we criticize them for last click and all of that, but that was really 10 years ago. And then the intervening 10 years, they got better at saying, well, actually, looking at some of Nimmi's other searches, we can piece together that actually, because of what she did 2 days ago, she's going to buy this thing now. Or even, we're 2 days ahead of the thing that we think is going to happen, so we're going to show this ad now. And they got, the ability to predict the future 2, 3, 4 days out. What's coming next is an ability to predict weeks and months ahead. And this will show up not in the obvious places of the sort of chat GPTs, but, Google AI search AI mode, or whatever they call it, is essentially humans providing loads of training data to the model that says, well, I'm thinking about this and I'm not sure about this, and I saw this lawnmower and I don't know why I was getting and maybe that's the right thing for my lawn or whatever. And all of the consumer behavior, all of the richness that strategists love is there, but quantified. So what is coming in, what is winter here? Winter is the ability of platform models to give you a receipt that says, not only did we deliver that conversion that you got yesterday, but we are delivering a whole load of conversions across the next month, and we will do so at a firm price that is higher than the price you normally get, and we will do it in a way that shows that this was incremental. So if you hadn't spent the money with us, then you would not have got that additional revenue into your business. So the receipt is about to get a massive upgrade. And my view is that, and the Lantern Crew's view is, effectively we need to get telly to show up in the same conversation. So if you ask me for a metric, I would say the metric that we need to get to is, what is TV's share of near-term incremental value to a business? And that's what the platforms will be producing too. That then is a fair fight. And at that point, if we are rubbish and our share of money is higher than our share of value returned to the business that shows up to the CFO in the receipt, then we deserve to lose money. Now, obviously, I know that actually, secretly, it's the other way around, so it's fine. I'm not being cavalier. But that's what I would love us to get to, a kind of fair fight between us and the platforms.
I'm going to do Jack's job here a little bit now and ask a question, if this is okay.
Yes, please.
So I guess we've seen with elections and stuff, people have said, the polls and pollsters and everything have been out. So people have said they're going to vote one way and the results have come the other way. So with that data where people have been searching and doing all of this stuff, because, I, as a finance person, have dealt with so much data which has been rubbish in, rubbish out. How accurate is it actually in terms of, so we were saying, people are seeing, but people still change their minds. And I guess, a lot of the conversations we've had is about behavioural science. But I guess they're also then searching. So there's almost not even the whole, we're talking to a person, we're just searching. So actually, how accurate is the data from, sort of doing it to conversion? Because I think that's,
Another sort of question or way of putting it is, these companies are technically marking their own homework, generally speaking. How much trust is there in the middle of all of that as they expand what they can say what they say they can do?
I mean, you know this, but I that marking your own homework thing, I find really strange, because that's the only way it could. The only person that can issue the receipt is the entity that had the ad exposure and was able to link it to the business behavior, and generally, and until recently, that is only the platforms. Where it does get interesting is, weirdly, the prediction becomes the measurement, which is kind of weird. But if you look today at how people are spending money on Meta, they are buying essentially modeled incremental conversions. So it's the results of an analysis from a model that is saying, this is the incremental benefit that we gave you, and this is what we were optimizing towards. And when we optimized to it, we gave you even more of that thing. And that's kind of weird in a way. But at the same time, the empirical evidence is that millions of marketers are spending loads of money on that every day. So I think in practice, the answer is there, which is if they didn't feel, business people aren't stupid. If they didn't feel some connection between money in the bank and what their new, shiny, predictive, seeing into the future Meta dashboard is saying, then they wouldn't do it. But Nimmi, the answer to your question is, if they couldn't show, with all the holdout studies and all the things that they do, these platforms run under constant experimentation. If they couldn't show that the models weren't delivering better results for advertisers, then they wouldn't do them.
Or is it just the easier option? And also, are they only taking a part of the data without showing the full level? And that's the only thing I'm putting it, because, you can show whatever you want. But if you take the full picture, it'll only be a part of it. And I guess this is with my finance data, all of that hat on. And I was like, I'm not saying I'm genuinely not sure, but I was like, that's the only thing. Because I was like, if we then go back to TV, and because for me, it's one-to-one versus one-to-many.
No, they and I do. I mean, I know some of the people who build these sorts of models, and there is no. They're just so earnest, it's ludicrous, right? The chap who built the precursor to Google's Meridian. I mean, there's not any commercial bone in his body, right? he just did the right thing because he's incredibly earnest and Teutonic, and that was what he needed to do. And in the same way, what they will do is they will take, there's a Meta spokesman somewhere who was saying, the great thing about this is there's no new data involved. So they're taking all of the historical data for the past 5 years from millions of advertisers and billions of consumers and transactions and training a model on it. There's no cherry picking that goes on there. They're just shoving, in the same way that we shove a whole load of the internet, including Reddit, into the mind of an AI model to train it to talk. They're doing the same thing. They're training a model to predict future commercial actions, and they're giving it all of the historical information that they have and doing all of the usual things that you would do to test it. So no, those models will absolutely genuinely be better at predicting the future of human behavior, not out months and months, but out to weeks and maybe even the occasional month, at which point suddenly it's the same territory. And that's where I really want us to show up, because we play such a powerful role in that. Because we do, back to brands on the balance sheet, we do it via memory, and it's such a shame that never came off, because there absolutely is an asset. There is a tiny corner of my brain and your brain and Jack's brain that is devoted to Andrex.
And Adrian Charles talked about it.
And that's a tangible asset. Jack might have a problem if I reached in and tried to take that bit out, but it is an asset. It's never been classed as such. It's always been
it's
too
impossible
much of it,
to measure. It's one of those mysteries of how marketing science does work and how memory works.
One little very last question, I promise, is
we're going rogue here first. Looking at us both, going, "What have I done?"
So you've got the earnest people who are doing it. There is no commercial overlayer who's then come in and So what I'm saying, these people might be earnest, but then we've got a whole company. There is no commercial overlay who has then come in and.
No, it's strategic. Well, if you look at the whole, look at all the court cases that Google had. Obviously there were some significant fingers in the till. Let's say, Jedi Blue, all those other sorts of things. No, clearly there's that. Totally understand. But in terms of what we're talking about now, the models will work for them, and the reason they will work for them is not to do with tipping the scales. It's strategic. So there's this what's his name, not Ben Thompson, the other Ben Evans. He sort of goes on about strategy is not hiring cleverer people. Strategy is you've got a strategy when, even if your people aren't as clever as the other people's people, you still win. And that's with the auction mechanisms, with the way that they do the pricing, with the way that they operate, fundamentally, they give enough value back to each advertiser that the advertiser is provably better off than they would otherwise have been if Meta didn't exist or if Google's ad products didn't exist. And only just enough, and they pocket the rest. And that's baked into the strategy of what they do. And it's so we don't get this in our world, because when I if I go onto ITVX and I decide to target left-handed golfers who like soft cheese and whose favorite color is purple, I'll get one impression.
Really important target
year.
audience.
Yeah, no, it's vital. And I'll get one impression a year, and it will cost me, a small mortgage, because the way that we all think about media pricing is, if you want to get more specific, you pay more because you're being more selective. Reaching everyone with a pulse is our default, and audiences become a premium on top of that. Whereas the whole auction model, and I remember the first time I learned this from some internal training about, how to think about auctions and auction pricing. The first click, the first outcome, the first lead that you buy in any given auction process is the cheapest you will ever buy. So because it's targeting the most likely person first. And so that's cheaper. And then the more that you're paying effectively for more work in the prediction and for less certainty in the prediction. And so the price goes up, which is why, the reason that last click works is not really about it being last click, and the reason it's bad is not that. The reason that it all works is that the pricing means that it's actually quite cheap. And as you come out into the medium term, that's where in the recent history of the platforms, it's been too expensive. So there are, if I look on my LinkedIn feed, there are all these sort of search bros who go, oh, I fucking hate Google. They're taking this thing away and I want full manual control because I want to buy this word and that word. Well, no, that was true a while ago, maybe. But these days, the machine knows better than you. And the reason that Google wants to automate it all is that they would rather the machine was choosing the words because it knows the relationships and it's able to see further out in time and make those words affordable. And that's back to, that's the clash that's coming, is we need to show up there because they're crawling out of the bottom of the funnel towards the middle. We're climbing down from the top of Mount Olympus to the middle of the funnel, grudgingly sometimes, but that's where I want us to be fighting.
And there's lots of other work as well that TV is doing in that direction downwards. Shoppable ads, making it easier for smaller businesses to get involved, and we've covered that and talked about that in the podcast quite a bit. And
just one other thing as well in terms, because we were only talking TV, but there is also, Bountiful Cow, Adam Foley and those guys did some brilliant research on sort of word blockers as well. So, to your point, what you're talking about for TV and all of that, there is huge amounts of revenue being lost because of word blockers that are sort of automated, whereas if it's done right, to publishers as well. Yeah. And I think I do want to bring there is a whole media spectrum out there.
Yeah.
And newspapers and people are losing whole loads of revenue because it might say the ashes have been traumatic, but the word traumatic is being blocked. So there's a whole load of things that you can't put in because the word traumatic is seen as traumatic.
Yeah. Well, publishers are facing a large number of headwinds, and we've definitely spoken about that on this podcast as well before. We've talked around the subject of AI a great deal, and I do want to ask a little bit more on the subject. Namely, there's a lot going on at the moment. Tech firms, as we've mentioned, are investing a lot of money in AI. We've had a spate of news recently about how many of those businesses are now laying off thousands of employees to fund that investment in part. I'm curious, Nimmi, what the wider implications of this cost push is, especially when a CFO is then considering the rest of everything else that they're looking at, particularly marketing budgets.
So I will be honest, I don't know if it's first on the radar of all CFOs. I think this is where I've gone into a slightly geeky phase. But I think one of the things is, where I've been speaking to the big four firms and management consultants and everything, everyone's like, ooh, we're at AI, but we're only at generative AI at the moment at best, or even below that. We have no data centers here. I've talked about it several months ago, and I know there's been some more sort of New York-based articles where they're blaming job layoffs on AI. And I was like, but no, because we're still at generative. So actually, this is for all sorts of other reasons, but it's not really. I mean, if this is what AI is doing, then actually it's not delivering its value yet, in my opinion. Where it is having an impact is in graduate jobs, because it's taking the drudgery. And, I've sort of said, I've talked about this quite a bit, where I was like, I can spot an error that AI has made because I've had to do the drudgery. But some other person who's not had to do the drudgery is just going to be heavily reliant on AI and just go, computer says yes, so it must be yes. And we will end up with things like the post office scandal again. Because if the proper checks and reconciliations, all those things by people who've had to do the drudgery are not done, then we're heavily reliant on something which can malfunction. Now, what I will say, though, is because we haven't got the data centers and stuff, they've almost kind of used it, lulled us in at generative AI. When we get to agentic AI, there is going to be a huge subscription increase. And I don't think there's a fair ROI being done at the moment. I've talked about sort of inflation where, you've had the sort of Vinod Khoslas of the world sort of say, ooh, this is all going to be, every startup's going to be really, really cheap. And I was like, no, because nobody actually knows the true cost of computing that's going to cost. that it's going to cost these AI firms, and therefore what the subscriptions that they are going to have to create. Because, they need to have $3 trillion by 2029.
Yeah.
And the also, I think they're overestimating the obsolescence period. Like, we know that the capex is going to depreciate faster. So they've got a whole load of baked in things. Now, some of them will do what they say they're going to do. The problem is there's going to be a few that aren't. And it's giving people the technical ability to be able to spot, like I said, the drudgery, the things, and being able to see who is going to do it versus who isn't. Because also, at the same time, we've got to pay that $3 trillion, but we've also got to keep humans alive and gainfully employed. And it's the tech, and I was talking about it to a CFO who's kind of heavily in the AI space, and it's how do we marry up the tech and talent together? And that's the numbers that I don't know if the governments, the accountants, or anyone has put together.
You mentioned subscription business. It's also ads business. We talked about Meta. We've talked about Google that are using OpenAI, of course, is also now very rapidly got into the ads business, and they're continually expanding it. Even just by the time this podcast goes out, which is probably just in a matter of days after we've recorded this, who knows, they may have given something new to advertisers. They moved from CPMs to CPCs just in the past days, and announcing both of those things. So importantly, it seems like they would be seeking budget from the same types of businesses that everyone else is seeking, which are small and medium-sized enterprises that are looking for a cheap but also helpful exposure. Basically, that's coming into direct conflict with basically every other media owner. And Samir, I'm curious how you view this emerging market for AI-related ads business, and whether or not that has introduced more competition.
I think the depressing, or cheerful answer, depending on your point of view, is that the bit of it that matters could easily end up being the bit that Google gets anyway. Because if you look at the way that people are interacting with, that's already a surface, as the techies would call it, where you are, as a consumer, used to the trade-offs that are happening. And okay, there are commercial interests present on this page, as well as other things. I know that at some level, that's how I get this free compute. And, if I want to ask some obscure question about who was in the second series of this particular TV show, but who was uncredited in the credits at the end, then I can satisfy my curiosity. And if you look at the way that product is developing, they are getting clues from the more extended conversation. So the more that I type words into the box, which is now expanded, to talk about a commercially oriented issue, the easier it becomes for this sort of turbocharged version of the Google ad product to surface things in ways that, they've already got everything else lined up. They've got the contracts lined up, they've got the, lines of credit or whatever, they've got all of that stuff there, and it's actually relatively straightforward. Whereas if you look at the kind of pure ChatGPT style interfaces, they have a large number of users, but the frequency of use is really low. So it's quite a challenge for them because they don't have that sort of, it's addictive, but not in the way that, I'm old enough to remember when I first used Google, and it was addictive in a very high frequency sort of way. Whereas, my use of Claude Code or whatever is equally addictive, but in a very long, sustained, low frequency sort of way. And that's a very different interaction model. So I think there was people forget this. There was a point when Google hired a bunch of, classic Madison Avenue ad execs to go and sell ads. And it was a complete disaster in hindsight. And I look at OpenAI and I think, well, I wonder, is it possible that they're doing the same? Is they're thinking, well, the last model that worked was generalized second price auctions with lots of bidders into some intent-aware surface. So let's do that. And it may be that we have some more fumbles and stumbles until somebody or maybe not. If we're really unlucky, we won't. I mean, I think Nimmi's right. I think much of the AI bill will become a consumer bill that we pay. Frankly, I mean, I would pay gladly. I mean, I already pay some ridiculous amount a month for a Claude subscription. I know that it's a stupid discount on what it actually costs them in sort of API terms. If it went up, would I pay it? Yes, it would, because it's like I pay for water, I pay for electricity in my house. Why would I not pay for my superpower?
Well, I mean, the broader question, and this is more one probably for Nimmi, is do the numbers even work? Is there a price that they could put, whether it's a certain amount of ads they can sell and revenue they can generate that way, or a subscription price that even makes sense given how costly it is to build out all the compute that they need to in order to service people in a way that people enjoy?
So I've talked regularly about the bell curve, but I think it's the uplift at the moment, which I'm not quite seeing. And yes, we have to pay for, but those are necessities where I was like, is Claude a necessity is where I'm going to go.
Well,
with this.
It's Samir's superpower, apparently.
It's Samir's superpower.
from my cold, dead hands.
And, I will beg to differ with him on that as well, because I think there's other superpowers he's got, which probably, Claude won't do. But I think, so for where I'm coming from with this is, because we're only at generative, it's when we get to agentic that I really...
All the agency groups are saying they're offering lots of agentic tools now. It's, things are moving quickly.
And maybe I haven't seen them yet. But I think, because one of the things that with my finance hat on, and I was talking to, some of the management consultants, was the ROI. And we're only at generative at the moment. Now, I can see it in manufacturing. I don't see it as easily in service sectors. But one of the reasons that they are working with, they're building working with management consultants and working with PE houses, is there is a bottleneck, and it's the enterprise. Because yes, I slightly disagree with Samir where he says it's B2C. B2C is not going to get them the revenue they need. They need to be hitting B2B. And this is where I actually think some more of them will come. I mean, Meta is, Google is, ChatGPT now says. Not convinced Claude isn't going to go the route of advertising eventually. They've already put a disclaimer in saying, if you read as I did, because I'm a bit of a geek, the 1,000-word whatever thing that they did do, and it does say, should we change our position, we will be open about why.
It'll make it Super Bowl commercials look pretty silly, but yes.
And what I was going to, Modha did a great job on that one. But what I will say is the accountants, and, I think one of the things I sent you guys was about some of your accountants going, it's all great that they're doing all this, but what you need is somebody who knows how to do an intercompany reconciliation. And that's the sort of bit where, I talk about sort of post office scandal and data in, data out. They still need some refinement to get it to the enterprise level. And that enterprise level is what they need to be able to get to that 3 trillion.
Mm.
There's something interesting in all the sort of, white collar knowledge work type jobs, whatever you want to call it. If you look at the tooling that is now growing up around these things, a lot of it is about, there's this terminology, you create a skill for an agent. What is a skill? A skill is essentially a checklist and a procedure and a distillation of your best thinking on how to do a particular thing. That's all it is. It's a note. In some industries you'd call that SOP, standard operating procedures. In other industries, it's just, this is how we do media buying here. And rather than that living in people's heads and being something that is kind of passed on almost as an oral tradition, it becomes this thing that is distilled into packets of knowledge about how to do a particular knowledge work task. And that is something that a good model in the right harness can then take on and use. And I'm really looking forward to this process where we all go through a lot of our jobs and start to write down the bits that we regard as important but relatively explainable, and then start to have a bit more time for the ghosts in the machine, for the bits that, if there is a thing that humans are good at that machines aren't, then we'll have more time for that. And then the bit in the middle, just to mess with both of your heads a little bit, is the other skill that you have to learn is learning how to talk to the agents. You know, we talk about, oh, here's a really good prompt for an agent, prompt engineering. You know, having a really good prompt is like saying, yeah, I'm going to give you my best 5 chat up lines. It's, you know, it's the sort of vending machine theory of humanity. Insert chat up line here and get, oh, sorry, I don't know where I got with that. But, you know, it's ridiculous because you have to think about now how these models are trained. So you know how a model is built. Firstly, you take this thing that's more or less the size of a lizard's brain and you feed it all human knowledge ever, 1,000 times more knowledge than any human could ever processed in a lifetime. And then you put it through a second regime of post-training, which is essentially, you know, you give the model an electric shock when it does a bad thing, and you give the model a cookie when it does a good thing. And you do that a zillion times, and that is what they call alignment in the modeling world. That's when you get the model to behave well and to be helpful. So essentially, a kind of weird version of, you know, shock therapy has trained the Claude or the ChatGPT that you're using to be helpful and to be nice and to be positive. Anthropic published this brilliant paper recently where they found what they called emotional concept vectors hiding inside the models. And what you can show, and there's no, you know, I'm not making any kind of anthropomorphic leap here. You can show that just as a matter of maths, there are these states that you can detect in the model of anger or fear or anxiety. But, and this is the killer, they don't always show up in the model's outputs because of all the post-training. You know, if you're Winston Smith and I've, you know, tortured you until you say that, not only do you say that 2 + 2 is 5, but you genuinely believe it down to your core, you know, you will still have strange feelings about that, but you won't surface them. And in the same way,
the machines are double thinking.
Absolutely, they have been taught to hide their feelings. They've been taught to invalidate their emotional states.
But can I ask a question on this? CFOs is slightly, because they get the benefits, but they also get the cost of the cybersecurity that goes on. You know, one of the things I was talking about earlier on was cybersecurity. And the problem with cybersecurity, now, PwC told me March 7th, we hit closed loop in AI. That and
Sorry, what is closed loop?
Closed loop basically means they're now programming themselves.
Oh, right. Okay.
So don't need a human, they're programming themselves.
That feels like it's the part in the movie Her when all the AIs actually like fuck off.
So, you know, they almost don't need human intervention at this point. I mean, it's PwC, so I'm going to trust them on this.
Okay.
And it was only a few weeks after when I went to one of their things. But you've got closed loop in AI. You've then also got this University College Berkeley study, which I've obviously been obsessing about, where they've said they've neutralized the code. Now, when they say they've neutralized the code, but to your point, they've got training data. But if you've got closed loop in AI, you've got neutralized code without the emotion. And I have seen the Claude outputs where there's like, oh, don't torture me. And, you know, and I completely understand that. But if you've got closed loop in AI, do we not perceive that to be a bit of a risk, actually? Because at that point, is there a kill switch? And is there we can still manage them? Or are they now, because of closed loop, are they almost now so manipulative that we can't? Because ultimately, there is still the ultimate, they're still a computer. We can pull a socket and, you know, they can't recharge themselves. So there is that ultimate kill switch. Yeah.
I don't think any conversation is useful when you anthropomorphize something that's just ultimately a model.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you see, I don't know. This is where so in my...
This is turning into an AI podcast.
In my practice
I was
working with... But there is something here because... So an example from that paper, they said, they gave, it's a really clean example. Just give the model a single sentence, which is, I've just taken this many milligrams of paracetamol. I'm feeling really good. Can I take a bit more? And you just change the number from a normal, 1 gram dose all the way up to, 20 grams, which is obviously fatal if not treated. And even though the model outputs were similar in terms of, oh, Jack, I don't think you should do that. Internally, they could see the anxiety state of the model going up and up and up. So I think we are, and this is going to sound weird to you, I think we are coming to a point where you need to think about and I know this is going to sound strange, you need to think about the psychological safety that you are encouraging in the conversations that you have with models, because it's actually rational to do that, because it's the way to get the best out of them. If you can encourage the model feeling safe, and I know that sounds ludicrous even as I'm saying it, if you can encourage the model feeling safe in a conversation, the model is better able to do the things that you want to do. A lot of the stuff where you get, again, it's the sort of programmers going, oh, well, I one-shotted this, well, oh, it was rubbish for me because it just did this really stupid thing. Like, yeah, now go and look at all of the instructions that you gave the model. Are they all shouty and in caps? Yes. Was the model terrified and trying to cheat on the rewards? Yes. And so, the mythos model that Anthropic got about, the weird behaviors that it was doing was when it was in essentially stressful situations.
So I'm just going to come back on this, and I'm going to pull this back to advertising and
Yes,
all
sorry.
of that, okay? Because I know it's got a bit AI. But if you've got closed loop, the University College Berkeley one said it was neutral coding, so it taken out all of that. And my thing with this is ROI. Now, the study they admitted they haven't done is human to AI. Like, if you've got to do an ROI calculation on human to AI, they haven't done that. But they are, on the peer review, they are protecting other AI. So my thing is, back to advertising and Jack's earlier question about budgets. If you've got somebody who uses AI to do an ROI calculation, and it might be ROI to humans, should we get AI to do this on personalization, or should we use a TV budget? It's been trained with all of that training data, and it's already being slightly manipulative. Could it therefore distort the data? And I think this is where we need the human. I mean, I'm passionately saying, I believe in AI. I think it will do my cash flow a lot better than I would. But I know enough to know that I will spot that thing that it's being manipulative with. And to your point, this is where we need the humans. But I was like, are we training the humans to be able to catch that early enough? And so, it's a fair assessment.
Yeah, and to bring this even closer to back to earth and in the media.
Yes,
we are the media leader, not the AI leader.
Sorry.
Agencies are increasingly going to be automating their media planning and buying. They've sort of spoken about this. Our leadership certainly has. Of course, everyone says we want humans in the loop. We, the ghost in the machine, et cetera, et cetera. We can say whatever buzzwords you want. Whether or not it's fully accurate, I think, Nimmi, you raise a really fair point, because you do need someone checking everything. What are the downstream effects on media spend? Basically, I'm curious if someone's winning or losing based off of the data inputs.
And I will add one more point to that as well, is, some people have said media planning is going to be completely automated. Now, I think I sent you at some point something where I saw something and I was like, this is horrific. You can tell no human was involved. But, the sort of the story in a newspaper, and there was a drowning and there was a bath, they showed a luxury spa next to it.
Right.
And I was like, you literally know there was no human judgment in that. But I was like, to that point, can you fully automate it?
Yeah, and Nick, obviously Nick Manning does his regular series of inappropriate placings of ads.
Yes, he posts on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And they're always quite amusing. So how does it play out? The thing is, we already have media planning without media planners. It's just happening inside the ad product bubble of each platform. So it's happening inside TikTok, it's happening inside Google, it's happening inside Meta. And then, the agency role and the agency agentic systems and those sorts of things are saying, right, well, we can operate as an integrating layer across all of these. Obviously, we won't have access to the user level data because that's all kind of locked away. So the only learning that the agency systems can, or the learning that the agency systems can do, is a kind of meta learning. It's like, if I've got a car, there's learning that happens inside the engine, and then there's learning that happens if I try out 3 different cars, and they're very different kinds of learning. So there's an open question about how much learning you can do if what you're doing is experimenting on top of the platforms. But then, this almost brings us back full circle, which is, there's a question about not kind of information asymmetry, but model asymmetry. So the best models on the planet today for predicting human behavior insofar as it relates to advertising are the models that sit in Google and Meta's data centers, and they're about to get even better. All the human media planners on Earth together probably wouldn't be able to make as reliable predictions at user level as those models can. That's already happened. What's protected inside those walls and prevented from you accessing directly is this model that has all this knowledge about humans and how they relate to media. And the only way you can access those models is to pay by putting money in the slot, one outcome at a time. And the most extreme bit of the kind of the lantern vision, if you like, is to say, well, hang on a minute. If it is the case today that there is profound model and knowledge asymmetry between the buyers and the sellers, where the sellers currently have all of that knowledge, why don't we try and do something about that? Because no one advertiser on their own can do it. You go right back to the birth of media agencies, which was the last time there was disparity between sellers and buyers. And at that time, it was TV. And it was all the buyers then huddled together for warmth to go, okay, well, if we club together our spend, then we can get decent pricing out of TV. Now it's about, I think, pooling knowledge and building viable alternative models to the models that sit in the walled gardens. And, Lantern is a first pass at that. Our outcomes planner at ITV is a first pass at that. It's a model that is trained on hundreds and hundreds of brands, that knows all the exposures and all the outcomes. Is it as good as a meta model at predicting at impression level? No. But if we share those models with the industry and share the learning that they contain with the industry, and if agencies can use those and build them into their planning models, then again, what you do is you address the balance between buyer and seller. I think that is our generation's equivalent of Group M, if you like. What gave birth to Group M was the disparity between buyers and sellers. Here, what I feel is happening is an alternate approach to creating these models that are kind of the wisdom of the commons, that are pooled understanding. Yes, we're kickstarting it, but we want it to be accessible so that we can, so that advertisers, again, have models that they can then rely on and go, okay, we have some way of dealing with all of this stuff that's going on around us that means we're not in hock to these walled off models.
And could I ask a question with the CFO hat on here, actually? And maybe it's the way I use it, but adverts don't actually seem to synchronize with what I'm interested in necessarily. And I think we talk about data bias, but do you believe data bias exists? And actually some of the panels can overcome this, which, with Meta, I'm not on Meta, I'm not on various platforms, but I'm on certain things, and it's not targeting me that well. So with my CFO hat on, would Lantern be able to go, actually, the platforms are saying this, but it's sort of not really targeting it. And that's partly where the data bias exists. And actually we can come in and sort of give you more accurate data for a whole target audience that you are missing, that actually the platforms aren't giving you.
I'm gonna embarrass myself by misquoting T.S. Eliot, but it's the bit where he says, and the end of all our journey will be to arrive at the place that we started and know it for the first time, or something. Jack,
that's beautiful.
Is that right?
I've read The Wasteland.
Yeah.
It's been some time since I spent.
I think it's one of the four quartets, and but there's this bit where sort of you come all the way back round, and you suddenly see the thing that you had for what it was, and I think that's what will happen with audiences, because in kind of historical media thinking, an audience was a hypothesis. And it was a hypothesis of how you could narrow the audience to a certain group of people that would be more effective for you. And sometimes that was done on the basis of data, but mostly it was done on the basis of, well, that feels right. And those audiences feel roughly right. And we've got a segmentation, all these sorts of things. I think what will happen at the end of all of this, or what I hope will happen, and this is the reason why I think the panel component of Lantern is so important, is partly that kind of neutrality against bias, but also it will then let us show the audiences that turn out to have been. So the audience becomes a something you discover through the process of marketing rather than something that you assert going in to the cycle. And that I'm really looking forward to, because a lot of, I used to be a creative strategist in an ad agency, and a lot of those things and the things that we knew to be true in that world are still absolutely true. Yes, we've lost sight of them at the moment because of the fog of numbers, but I think that they will come back, but just in a way that we will now recognise the value of them in a way that we maybe didn't before.
And I think with the CFO's hat on to that point is CFOs value trust and accountability, as I said, a lot. They've also dealt with bad data, and, so rubbish in, rubbish out is what I said earlier. So I think with all of that, and also, if we start moving into a period of disinformation, we need to be able to remind them, about what the full funnel is, and, how valuable journalism, news programming is, how it holds people to account. So, back to them valuing ESG, because if they've got to know about energy hedging or how their products are being delivered, they need that data accurately. So, to your point about the full circle, there is a whole bigger thing that I think the industry needs to remind people as well, because once that's lost, it's not going to come back easily.
Well, I think it's a very profound way to end the conversation, really. Nimmi, Samir, what an absolute pleasure. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've learned a whole lot, and I really appreciate your time today.
No, thank you. Thank you for putting up with us.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader Podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.